Hi guys, my name's Brian Shepard, um, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about gun control policy in the United States. It's a current topic, and with the 2020 elections rolling around again, I thought it would be a good one to talk to you guys about. Anyways, just to start out, I just kind of wanted to talk to you about how you know, gun violence and suicide has affected my family. Um, if you see the guy kind of kneeling to the left with the striped shirt, that's Carl's. He's my sister in law's brother and lived with my brother and my sister in law through his struggles with depression and mental illness. And um, about a year and a half ago, he committed suicide with a firearm, actually in their house. And, it's still just affecting our family to this day and affects me uh, emotionally and mentally too. So it's just a big topic. Anyways, the family there, that's my brother is the one in blue kneeling down, and that's her dad and mom on the left, and her other brother Connor on the right with the black shirt on. But they started Carl's Cause um, to start giving resources to people affected with mental illness and reducing the stigma that goes along with it. Um, Anyways, they are have been just amazing and is actually started have donated tons of money to the new KU Health Center on Strawberry Hill that's just opening up right now. And so a big part of that opening is actually through them, and just how they've been dealing with the loss and starting to make a change for other people. So, guys, if you want any more information, you can always look up Carl's Cause on Facebook, or it's at carlscause.org if you'd like to know more about the organization. Anyway, so the problem is that I found is that legislation favoring increased access to firearms has resulted in increased death. It's a pretty general statement, but as we're looking at gun control measures, what can we do to basically save lives? So, just a little bit of background, and there's a ton of background when you're looking at this topic. But so far this year, as of September 3rd, there's been 289 mass shootings in the U.S. That have left 313 people dead. Mass shootings defined as when four or more people are shot, not including the shooter. But we see all these mass shootings in the news, and it's so sensational. But what we don't see is how big this epidemic is, and it's less than 1% of really what's going on. There's 32,000 deaths each year in the U.S. From gun violence, and surprisingly, 60% of those result from suicide. So it's not just the homicide and the mass shootings. This is happening, in homes across America. And I know I've been affected multiple times by friends and family that have taken their lives. And I know you guys have too, because it's just such a big thing. And so, how do we address that? There's been 74,000 non fatal injuries. And a good way to look at this, actually, I found this information. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. But their odds of dying in a car accident are about the same as dying from a gunshot. And anyways, I like emailed Elizabeth Warren. I was like, oh my gosh, you have to frame this like this because, it just makes it so, um, I guess it just makes it easier to think of legislation more like, how we license our cars, and how we need to get a driver's license. And then of course I look on her webpage, and of course she's already saying this. And a friend told me Barack Obama actually stated this in one of his talks about gun violence too. So definitely the politicians know, and it's but I think that's a really interesting fact is, here we're talking about having a car and having a gun, and can we have a car, just buy one without any sort of training and not license it and just do what we want with it? And can we do the same thing with guns? Anyways, we'll look at that a little bit more later. So kind of the two big players in, the political debate are the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and the Brady Campaign. They're both kind of opposite entities. The NRA started in 1871 with a goal of promoting and encouraging shooting on a scientific basis. They've done a lot, and teach kind of developed safety courses that are being taught by state fish and game departments. They work for the 4-H, the Boy Scouts of America, and the American Legion. Currently, it has over 3 million members, and receives most of the uh, media attention on, pro-gun right stance. So they're the most important in framing that debate in the political arena. And the Brady campaign's kind of the polar opposite. They started out in the 1980s as the Handgun Control Incorporation, and changed its name in 2001. It's a grassroots organization, and they fight for legislation that protects people from gun violence. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the big bill that passed in a bit. Kind of just jumping into state policy, because that's controlled by the state and national level. Our own state, Missouri, currently has an F in its gun score laws, and that's taken by the Giffords Law Center. They basically kind of take all the states and then give them a score on how well their gun laws are. So, and just kind of where Missouri stands, we actually have the sixth highest gun rate out of all the 50 U.S. states. Hawaii and Massachusetts are actually doing the best. They have the lowest gun deaths by state, and their score, they actually got an A minus. Kind of looking at how the laws differ in each state, are between Missouri, which has an F, and Hawaii and Massachusetts, which have an A minus. Missouri, you can have conceal and carry. You don't need to register your firearm with the state. You don't have to report a lost or stolen firearm. Ammunition's not significantly regulated. And local governments actually are not allowed to regulate firearms. There's also kind of unsafe guns out there referred to as junk guns or Saturday night specials, and those aren't regulated. On the other hand, you look at Massachusetts and Hawaii, and they require you to obtain a state license for anyone that purchases a firearm, and all dealers. Hawaii does a really great job of regulating large capacity ammunition magazines, and Massachusetts does it a little bit more, but not quite as well. Both states do not allow these unsafe handgun sales like Saturday night specials or junk guns. And kind of, I think another really interesting thing, Massachusetts has really put a lot of funding into programs for communities that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence. and Hawaii, kind of another thing that they do is they do prevention regulations for children, or for child access prevention. So if you own a handgun, there's things you need to do if you have a child in the house, and that's all regulated by law. Okay, a little bit look into kind of the big national policy things that are set in place. Of course, we all know about the Second Amendment. A good Republican argument is, you know, we have the right to bear arms by the Second Amendment. And basically, I'm just going to read this for you guys because it's pretty interesting. But it was passed in 1789, and it states, a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's two ways of looking at this. The first way you can say is kind of like an individual right theory, which is basically kind of the Republican view or pro rights group or view. And it states that, um, you know, people have the right to keep and bear arms. And so anything that the US does would be unconstitutional if you're to take away that right. However, there's a different way, a second way of interpreting the law, which is the wording of the well regulated militia. And it states that um, the law doesn't necessarily guarantee individuals the right to keep and bear arms, but it allows the states to prevent Congress from bearing its right to defend itself. So it allows for the creation of a militia by the states, and there the militia has the right. The people in the militia have the right to keep and bear arms, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee an individual right um, to keep in guns. So, kind of in 1968, this is after we had President John F. Kennedy assassinated, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther F. King Jr. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was passed, and basically that was the law that prohibits the sale of firearms and ammunition to felons and other prohibited persons. And it's basically enforced by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Division. And then, kind of in a response, things kind of come and go. There was the Firearms Owner Protection Act of 1986. And it kind of redefined what a gun dealer was by the Gun Control Act, and it excluded people who just make occasional sales or repairs, so they're no longer considered gun dealers. And it allowed for the interstate sale of rifles and shotguns, and it repealed, or excuse me, it outlawed machine guns. So no more machine guns after that act. And so kind of in 1981, so even before the Firearms Owner Prevention Act, there was an assassination attempt of President Ronald Reagan that left his press secretary, James S. Brady, wounded. And this was kind of the Brady campaign's big passage. And So eventually it's kind of stirred around for over 10 years, in legislation in Congress. And then in 1993, it was officially passed, with the support of President Bill Clinton. It imposed a 5-day waiting period on handgun sales, and it eventually created the NICS, or National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And basically, what happens is if you go to buy a gun at a licensed firearm dealer, then they submit your information to this background check system. And then if you are a felon, there's different kind of regulations that prevent people from getting a gun. But if you're a felon, or if you've done, big crime and have been in jail for over a year, then you're most likely going to get denied a gun through this. Basically, all the states are using this in some sort of service to provide background checks, but there is a big loophole, and I'm sure you guys have heard about that. If you go to a gun fair, then those aren't licensed dealers, and therefore you do not have to submit this background check to the NICS. You can just go ahead and buy a gun from there. And it also doesn't apply to online vendors, so anyone can still buy a gun online, or at a gun fair, basically. So it's not working. Lastly, 2017 was kind of the last legislation that passed, and that was after the big mass shooting in Vegas. And if you guys remember, I'm sure you remember, all the talk about the bump blocks, and how I think that the shooter was basically not allowed to have these guns, and there was a problem because basically the NIC, like, he shouldn't have been able to have a gun, and so, but there was no reporting to the local law authorities by the NICS. So basically it created, now basically they can alert local authorities if somebody has purchased a gun and that they weren't supposed to. So that was the big passage. And it also, the bump blocks was the big deal, but it really didn't get past that, or it didn't really, it was 2017. So, we're talking Republican-controlled Congress, and but basically bump blocks got, now they're like reported to a database. I don't know the actual wording, but basically we're reporting the use of bump blocks, but there's no outlaw on them. You can still buy them. Okay, so current policy. Basically, I kind of just chose to hone in on two separate ideas. One, and actually we'll just go back here to the, the NICS Fix NICS Act of 2017 that was recently passed was really not what was being recommended by the NRA at the time. The NRA was basically trying to pass conceal and carry state reciprocation, so that if you are, that one state would have to honor another state's license for conceal and carry, and honor that license was kind of the NRA's way of looking of, hey, we're promoting conceal and carry and open carry laws. This is our way of making people more safe. And so kind of the actual evidence behind concealment laws is minimal to nothing. There is no studies out there that have said that conceal and carry laws are effective. One study looked at Virginia, and they just haven't really found that conceal and carry laws do anything. And a lot of the argument for conceal and carry laws is that, if you have a gun on you, then you can protect yourself against crime. But the statistics show that only 0.9% of crimes are prevented by somebody with a gun. So basically, people are stocking up on guns out there. They say, oh, it's conceal and carry, or even open carry, which Texas allows open carry. So you can carry your gun on your holster or on your shoulder, on your hip or shoulder, and just wherever you want. And it's even just been expanded to like universities and stuff like that. So we could be in class, if we weren't online, and there could be, your partner could be sitting there with a gun on them, just right out in the open. So that's Texas. um, but basically, the main points are, it's not evidence based. um, Missouri has conceal and carry, Texas has open carry. And if we're really talking about it preventing crime, that it never happens. And so basically, since Senator Warren jumped ahead in the primary polls, last week, Democratic primary polls, I don't know what happened after the debates last night. I think Joe Biden kind of had a pretty good um, turnout, but we'll see here in the next few weeks who's leading still. But and she's just leading by a hint of a margin. But anyways, she's actually came out. She's one of the few Democrats that have came out with a comprehensive gun violence uh, policy. Gun violence policy. And she hopes to end gun violence by 80%. And basically, it's centered on decreasing gun access. And so, how she wants to do this is basically increasing gun taxes by a ton, 30%, and 50% on ammunition, which I think is pretty dang interesting because, it really will impact people in impoverished neighborhoods and people who can't afford that tax. Like, they won't be able to buy a gun, which, interestingly enough, a lot of those neighborhoods are most affected by gun violence disproportionately. But so that's kind of the first step to just persuade people to not buy guns. She's also going to place a limit on the amount of guns purchased, raise the minimum age to 18. She wants to reinstate an assault weapons ban that we had at one time, but currently, went by the wayside after 10 years. Um, let's see. She she hopes to end 3D printed guns, and uh, disallow converting pistols to shot barrel rifles using pistol braces. She also wants to fix what is called the boyfriend loophole. And basically, that just is. Oh, goodness. Sorry. My notes are all over the place. But, anyways, that basically just. Oh, goodness. Okay. So basically, you're not allowed to buy a gun if you've committed domestic violence. But the way the law is written is that only applies to somebody who was living with their spouse when they committed the violence, or had kids with the spouse who committed the violence. But it doesn't apply to people who aren't living with the spouse at or married to the spouse that committed the domestic violence. So if you were a stalker, or if it was your boyfriend, then you could commit domestic violence, but you can still own a gun. So Senator Warren's plan is to end that loophole as well. So no domestic violence perpetrators can buy a gun. Okay, so that's kind of everything. That's kind of the policy that's out there, and the potential policy by Senator Warren's plan. Um, you know, I guess I just want to say that a couple other things with Senator Warren's plan is she wants to end the filibuster, and pass a lot of this through executive action. um, and, pass legislation. But of course, it's going to most likely be a Senate, majority, or a Republican majority in the Senate. So we'll see, if all this happens, what could actually happen from the legislation standpoint. But basically, in conclusion, we found that states that have decreased gun access laws have less gun violence and suicide. So, states like Hawaii and Massachusetts that actually have laws in place to reduce gun access are the only states that are seeing less gun violence. The open conceal and carry laws that the NRA is kind of advocating for haven't been shown to be effective. Um, and so, which direction do we go for? I think, and, kind of the the purpose of my paper was that we need these laws in place on a national level, not just a state level, to really decrease gun access. We just need to, stop arming ourselves to the teeth, worrying about our neighbors, and just reduce on just getting guns away from people. Um, so just kind of in summary, 310 people are shot every day in the United States. And, the US is doing the worst of gun related deaths out of all developed countries. And we rate 28th in the whole world for gun violence deaths. As our purpose for nurses is to advocate for policy and political candidates that support measures that are going to protect the public health. And so, I'm a crazy, liberal Democrat that loves, Senator Warren and some of those views. But, my uncle owns a gunpowder manufacturing business and made a fortune, and he goes to shoot and, collects guns, and that's his deal. And, all I can say is, when I just look back at Carl, and how he could be potentially just around here today if there was not a gun in the house, and my brother never freaking uses it. It was given as a family gift, um, and he kept it locked up. And unfortunately, when there's a will, there's a way. But we've been working for him for months, and maybe we could have just done better as a family. So that's it. Gun control violence, basically decreased gun access, getting rid of the guns does save people, and open conceal and carry laws haven't been shown to do much of anything. So you guys make the decision, and what you think you're about the best way to go about this, but that's just kind of what the facts say and the ideas that are out there now. So anyways, thank you so much for listening to my very long spiel. I hope it's not over. And I look forward to hearing your guys' presentations as well.